Sugar plantations in Cuba have played a crucial role in the island's history and economy, particularly during the colonial period under Spanish rule. The rise of sugar as a major cash crop in Cuba began in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, fueled by increasing European demand for sugar and the expansion of plantation agriculture. Economic context. By the late 18th century, sugar had become a highly profitable commodity in Europe. The demand for sugar was increasing rapidly, leading to a boom in its production in the Caribbean, including Cuba. The Spanish crown, recognizing the economic potential of sugar, encouraged the development of sugar plantations on the island. Plantation system. Cuban sugar plantations were large-scale operations that required significant labor. The cultivation and processing of sugarcane were labor-intensive, involving the planting, harvesting, and milling of sugarcane, followed by the boiling and crystallization of sugar. Introduction of enslaved Africans. To meet the labor demands of the expanding sugar industry, Spanish colonists increasingly relied on enslaved Africans. The transatlantic slave trade brought millions of Africans to the Americas, with Cuba becoming one of the largest importers of enslaved people. 2. Living conditions. Enslaved Africans on Cuban sugar plantations faced harsh and brutal conditions. They lived in poor housing, had limited access to medical care, and worked long hours under strenuous conditions. The work was grueling, involving heavy physical labor in a hot and humid environment. The exploitation of enslaved labor was central to the profitability of sugar plantations. The wealth generated by the sugar industry significantly contributed to the economic development of colonial Cuba, benefiting Spanish colonialists and plantation owners while perpetuating the cycle of exploitation and oppression of enslaved people. African influence. Despite the harsh conditions, enslaved Africans and their descendants made significant cultural contributions to Cuban society. African influences are evident in Cuban music, dance, religious practices, and cuisine, contributing to the island's rich cultural mosaic. Resistance and rebellion. Enslaved people resisted their conditions through various means, including work slowdowns, sabotage, and escape attempts. There were several notable slave revolts in Cuba, including the significant uprising in 1844 known as the Cuban Slave Rebellion. Gradual reforms. The abolition of slavery in Cuba was a gradual process. The Spanish government enacted several reforms to address the issue, but significant economic interests continued to resist abolition. 2. Final abolition. Slavery was officially abolished in Cuba in 1886, marking the end of an era characterized by the exploitation of enslaved labor on sugar plantations. The end of slavery led to significant social and economic changes in Cuban society. The legacy of sugar plantations and slave labor continues to influence Cuban society today. The history of exploitation and resistance has shaped Cuba's cultural identity and collective memory, contributing to ongoing discussions about racial and social justice on the island. The impact of this history is reflected in Cuba's rich cultural heritage, its complex social dynamics, and the continuing efforts to address historical injustices.